Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's event. I'm Ludivine Wolksick, the Executive Director of FACCNE, the French-American Chamber of Commerce of New England. Today's session is the 5th edition of our DEI virtual series, sponsored by EY and IPSEN, and organized in partnership with the FACCs of Atlanta and Chicago, with the support of AmCham France. In the name of the FACC New England and our national network, I'd like to welcome our exceptionalist panelists from IBM, EY, Neurodiversity Pathways. They are joining us from Pennsylvania, New York, and California for an exciting conversation about neurodiversity in the workplace. With no further ado, I will now turn it to Arkansas and our moderator, Carin Knoop, Executive Director at Harvard Business School, to start this session. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ludivine. Welcome, everyone. Good to be connected from all over the US and also the world. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. I think the FACCNE has been one of these rare institutions that started a conversation around dialogue and inclusion and kept on having it. Didn't stay at a once and done, really challenged us to think about the various dimensions of diversity, not just the primary ones, the secondary ones, everything that really creates this fantastic palette of human talent that we have. We're gathering today in order to focus on neurodiversity. And what we would like to do is focus on 4 A's. So there's a framework that we're hoping will help you sort of leave this webinar with some ideas about what you might be doing. The first one is awareness, which is, we have to learn to understand. And often there is a temptation to sort of rush ahead and want to find solutions. So we'll spend a little bit of time, our first question, around the topic of awareness. What is neurodiversity? What does it mean? What do we think it means? What do the experts that we have assembled here will encourage us to think about what it means? The second is acceptance, which is, as Nat counseled when we were preparing for this, we should stay at awareness, not too long, because we have a lot of work to do towards acceptance and the rest of the steps. So the second is, once you think you understand the phenomenon, how do you integrate it into the fabric of your everyday sort of personal and professional life? Then comes action, which, words are easy, as we've also seen in the past year, but action, which is what concretely can you do? How can you change the systems that you have been working with that have probably benefited you, and really think about how they impact individuals who may be different from you. And then once you do that, it's sometimes easy to hire, difficult to retain. How do you really drive adherence to the goals that you've set for yourself, and then how do you measure? We're going to get started with the awareness part, and there, Nat, maybe I'll ask you to go first. As you answer the question, please also tell our audience, how do you come to this work? What you wish to share about yourself individually. Nat, thank you very much for getting us started.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Nat Lakowski, and first and foremost, I am a neurodivergent. I work for IBM. I've been with IBM for over 26 years, and since 2016, I've been the Neurodiversity at IBM Resource Group co-chair. I'm also the parent of a proudly autistic IT professional as well. And my own neurodivergence was first recognized, and that's one of the language comments you'll see me talk to in just a minute, in college, but it really was only until I started seeing the discrimination and bias against my son going through this, that the mother bear in me kind of came forward to say, we need to do something to improve this. So for many people, the word neurodiversity might be new, and I'll just give a quick definition of that. And that is, neurodiversity is a concept to respect and accept neurological differences, just as we would accept any other human variation, such as race or gender or ethnicity. And these differences should not be worked to be cured or masked, and they really need to be embraced. So a super quick thought experiment I'm going to ask everybody to do, and if you're on chat, you can feel free to play along. I'd like everybody to close their eyes for a moment and think of a bird. and how the bird moves and where it lives or what it works, how it works. And if you want to type into the chat the bird that you thought of, that would be great. And I'm going to see some of the responses and see what we get. We have an eagle, a dove. I'm also a scoutmaster, so I love that eagle reference. Bluebird, hummingbird, a parrot. Okay, so the bird that I'm thinking of is a penguin. And the penguin uses its wings for swimming and not flight. It's not broken. It's designed for a specific environment. It has super strength, the fortitude to survive in the harsh Antarctic, works together as a team. But if you put that penguin in the middle of the desert, it's not going to do well. The penguin does not need to be cured. It is still a bird, just like the ostrich that also doesn't fly. And that's one way to think of neurodiversity and embrace the different strengths that we can bring. When we speak about neurodiversity, we're really trying to move everything from a medical model into a social model. So language is very important. Identity first language is used. I'm a neurodivergent. People use autistic or neurodivergent depending on what they prefer. And this is what the community prefers. There are some neurodivergents that prefer to say they are a person with ADHD or whatever, and we should always accept that person's individual opinion. But as a default, neurodivergents prefer identity first because this is not something I have. I don't keep it in my pocket. It's not something I should need to worry about curing. I'm not a person with femaleness. I'm not a person that is on the female spectrum. Let's change the language here. So in the culture, we use recognized as neurodivergent instead of diagnosed. Things like high functioning, we use high support needs or low support needs because you could measure support intrinsically outside of the person, difference instead of diagnosis, or things like, suffer from. This is not something I suffer from. This is something to be celebrated and embraced as long as we can remove these biases and microaggressions and things like that, that we're here, we have a voice, and let's have a conversation. This needs to be a two-way street with neurodivergent and neurotypical working together, just like in any other human factor.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nat. Ranga, should we go to you next?
Good afternoon or good morning to everyone. And I'm Ranga Jayaraman. My association with neurodiversity is I have a son who is autistic. And he was recognized as such, as Natalia said, or diagnosed, depending on where we are in our understanding of neurodiversity, only when he was in college and was having a very difficult time in terms of keeping up academically. In fact, got into probation twice. And that's when I kind of woke up in terms of, okay, something isn't quite making sense. Since about the 2011-2012 timeframe, when this happened, I would say that my life has not been the same because I have been learning and learning and learning. And every time I feel like I've reached a certain level of understanding, the universe, teaches me that there's yet more to be understood. So for me personally, the way I relate to neurodiversity is like this. Neurodiversity is normal. If you look at many, many things in the natural world, those of you who are mathematically trained or knowledgeable, we have, distributions. And one of the most common distribution in nature is that of a normal distribution. Mm-hmm. And if I ask you the question, which part of the normal distribution is abnormal? That's like really not a very good question, right? Because every part of the distribution is part of normal distribution. And that is the situation with human beings. And one of the most critical organs inside of the human is the brain. And we don't see the brain, but the way we can experience the brain is through the behavioral and cognitive characteristics of the individual. And there are many, 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 many dimensions of behavioral and cognitive characteristics of human beings. And along any one of those characteristics, people as a species, humans as a species, they are distributed widely differently from one another. When we can bring a mindset of seeking to understand the individual that you're dealing with, not judging them, not trying to put them in a box, not try to have any kind of, they can do this and they cannot do that and all that. When we seek to understand first, and based on that understanding or awareness, as we have said, when we take a mindset of intentional inclusion of people for all that they are, their characteristics, their abilities, and bring a mindset of acceptance for their differences. That acceptance can only come from a place of awareness. That acceptance mindset will lead to how can I help empower this individual in whatever context that we are in, social context, educational context, workplace context. How can I serve to empower the other individual? Do unto others as you would unto you. I would appreciate if others support me so that my strengths can shine in that context. Why don't I bring that empowerment mindset? Nat mentioned about the social model, and a step from there is the empowerment model is how can I support you? How can I enable you to be the best that you can be? Then we're aligning with the concept and the movement of neurodiversity.
I think in addition with supporting the individuals, just making sure that the enterprise benefits from the talents that are
absolutely as leaders, as organizational change agents. It is imperative on us to recognize that the dominant design of processes in the world are not universal designs. And we as creative beings can do so much better.
Right. Yes, well, processing, we all profess to value creativity, and then schools and enterprises do a very good job of norming to, again, that word to the center. So so I'm going to go to you, Jamel, next, and I'm going to take the opportunity to wish you, to the entire world, a very happy birthday. Thank you for joining us last minute. We really appreciate that you're here. So all the very best. Curious about your path, your history, and maybe we can extend the conversation to maybe other types of neurodiversity as we transition into the acceptance part, and how companies have changed the way that they're thinking about the processes that Ranga started to discuss.
Carin, so thank you so much for the opportunity, and it's so exciting to be able to present with Nat and Ranga again. So we've been on panels in the past, but for neurodiversity, at least from our perspective, we look at it just a little bit differently. And so when we look at neurodiversity, I look at it from a neuroatypical perspective along with a neurodivergent perspective, and it's really the combination of the two coming together to really solve for whether it be business imperatives or really innovative thinking. We have been able to harness, I would say, the talents of, again, the neurodivergent mindset as well as the neurotypical mindset really coming together to really look to see how do we team, how do we really force or enforce a transformative workforce that is really going to be inclusive of not just the way a person looks, whether it be male or female or race or gender. It's really just the ability to think differently. And the ability to think differently is inherent within any other type of cognitive difference, whether it is autism or Asperger's, whether it's OCD or ADD or ADHD. These are all of the things that really come into play when we start talking about individuals that are neurodivergent. And so the combination, like I said, is really how we speak to this broader neurodiversity movement. As it relates to myself, obviously, I am an African-American male. One of the things that I've learned recently is to be able to share for anyone that is listening audibly. I am wearing a black shirt today and I have on black specs. And people often comment on this great smile that I have, but I'm not sure if it's that great or not. In any event, I do not identify as a neurodivergent individual, a neuroatypical individual. I do have children, but none of my children have a level of cognitive difference that we are aware of. I don't have anyone in my immediate family or extended family that has received a diagnosis or who identifies with a level of cognitive difference. This is one of the reasons why I think it's so exceptionally powerful to have the opportunity to speak on panels and to be a part of this tremendous movement, because I'm serving as an example of what we really should be doing within our organizations as well as our workplaces, is really thinking about how can we be that much more inclusive, even if you don't have direct affinity to any of these cognitive differences that some of my colleagues have.
Fantastic, thank you. Ranga, maybe we can pick up on that topic and go back to you commented about how do you empower the individuals and sort of pair this with the teaming comment that Jamel made in terms of acceptance, and how do you integrate diversity into your teams? How does it change the way that a manager should behave? Let's spend a few minutes there before we go on to the actions. And I think it would be good to be very specific in terms of what does it actually mean to team with somebody who might have difficulties with written words, or somebody who might be less secure around numbers, and how do we actually really think very concretely as a manager, what is it that I need to know? How do I need to behave? What are the resources that I can go to, so that we can get specifics for the audience?
That's an incredible question, and it's a very, very important one. And I'll actually try to frame it, somewhat differently, and I'll come to the neurodiversity aspect of it. Most of us spend most of our waking hours in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
We probably spend more hours with our colleagues in the workplace than we do with our family members, which means that in a workplace is such an important aspect of our well-being. And there's actually a colleague of mine when I was in Stanford GSP, who's written a book called Dying for a Paycheck. And his primary thesis there is that workplaces can either make or break an individual in terms of their well-being. Mm-hmm. And what is it that we can do as managers, leaders, and organizations is to commit to building a psychologically safe environment in the workplace. Psychologically safe environment means you let people bring their authentic selves to the workplace. You allow people, equal access, equal ability to express themselves. Let different points of view flourish without having any form of a dominant view as the only accepted view and all of that. I think every manager has a sacred duty. And I used to be, for 37 years, I've been a manager, leader in large corporations and organizations and all of that. I'll tell you that looking back on all of that from the place of neurodiversity, I think that many of the premises on which I used to operate are not really sound premises, because there was a sense of, you got to get this thing done and all of that. In the process, the individual didn't matter. I'm of the view now, no, the thing that matters the most is the ability of the individual to bring their authentic selves into the workplace. And that comes from intentionally signaling that we are embracing human diversity in every dimension of diversity that humans differ in. And I would say neurodiversity provides a fantastic sort of place from which to embrace all forms of diversity, because it transcends all other forms of diversity. It's the most fundamental dimension of diversity. And if we can embrace that, seek to learn about others, what are the areas that are strong in them, what are the areas they could use support in. Similarly, understand yourself. What are the areas that I'm strong in? What are the areas I would benefit from your support? Then we are being the beautiful, vulnerable human beings that collaborate with each other to create a great place. It may sound like, I'm going way off into sort of ether here in terms of talking about it. Everything that I'm saying is extremely practical the psychological safety. Google did a extensive amount of research in why do Team X performs extremely well, Team Y is not performing well, even though Team Y is filled with 18 players, whereas Team X is not all 18 players. The difference they found is the level of psychological safety that the leader on the team created in each of that. I'll stop there.
I think it's interesting to pair the psychological safety also with tools. So for example, at Facebook, they've developed a user guide. I think it's spelled YOUSER, which is, this is, if you do this, this is how I react, this is how I am. And I've actually found this very useful in recruiting. So for example, when I recruit, I share as much as possible about how I am, what will happen when you walk into my space. I'll be moving around, I'm quite agitated. You will think I'm not paying attention, but I am. And then individual will say, well, this is how I like people to talk to me. This is how I present to the world. So I think sometimes it also needs to come from the team leader to be willing to share and then invite, their colleagues to share back. I think it's very difficult for an individual to start doing
Absolutely.
so.
Leadership has responsibility.
Sorry. I apologize, Ranga, I didn't hear.
I said leadership has responsibilities.
Yes.
They do need to lead.
Yes, but that's also very challenging if there is no acceptance of that everything can be very powerful. Nat, any reactions of something maybe that you've seen at IBM or that you can share with people?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I want to comment as well that the statistics are always changing, but right now it's like 1 in 50 people that you meet are neurodivergent and 1 in 20 are autistic. That goes across huge intersectionality. So it's not only the people who you work with, it's matching your client base, it's matching the external community. You're having users, when you're doing testing for IT tools, think of that neurodivergent persona, whether it be dyslexic or anxiety or anything in between. But the sense of having that psychological safety is huge. 2 things we've done at IBM, we've developed virtual safe space communities. One's called Actually Autistic, and they actually called actually Neurodivergent. And you don't have to show a diagnosis. We have a couple of gatekeepers to say the IBMer has to come to that individual person and say, I'm a neurodivergent, I want in. So we do have these safe spaces, but we actually call them task forces because we don't want to diminish the importance, because sometimes people think, oh, safe space, psychological safety, that's that warm, fuzzy thing. We're task forces. These are places that we can create initiatives on our own to say, hey, what do we want to do for April? Or hey, what about this? But more importantly, and this is, I think, the most empowering thing across, is that our task forces are being requested from HR, from comms, to get vetting, to get representation. Because a well-intentioned ally can do just as much harm than somebody who is actually trying to do harm, where we can come back and ask questions to say, okay, this agency wants to partner with us. What percentage of their board of directors are neurodivergent? How are they expressing representation? Where is the funding going? Where is it that we have a voice to say, this is what we need? And now it's actually coming full circle. So it's not only us saying, this is what we need, it's, hey, let's be proactive here. And now is a perfect time to think about these things. Like people are redesigning for COVID. Mm-hmm. Think about the sensory diet that you're giving to your people if they are in office, or the accommodations or success enablers, which a couple of companies now are using, which I like better because it's removing that accommodation from that medical model. Mm-hmm. To think about that, like I cannot sit in a distracting environment. So please don't put me near the elevator that goes bing, or the kitchenette that smells like burnt popcorn and Thai food, or the water cooler. Let me pick where I can thrive best. I'm a penguin. I work best here. Don't put me here. And think about, do we need to have that medical letter to say from a doctor to say this person can't sit here? And that brings in the huge amount of bias in trying to even get that golden ticket of diagnosis. In a lot of these doctors or experts, there's huge bias against women, against age, against people of color, where you cannot get that diagnosis because these tests were written for 8-year-old white schoolboys. So you can't get the diagnosis, so then you can't get the therapy, so then you can't get the accommodation. So where are these blockers going in? But that safe space is huge. And for managers and companies, I would just say open your heart and have a conversation and think about it. My own son's journey, you know, he went to a job fair at his internship fair at his university, and he put on the scratchy suit and got his resumes in hand and waited in line to get in to the gymnasium full of, 300 people in booths. And he just walked in, immediately physically got sick. Like he literally threw up in a trash can, not to be gross, but that's what it is. And called me and said, I'm never going to get to these people. I can't get in. And it made me really upset and angry. And I went through all that thing, but it was just as discriminatory as if there was no elevator. So having quiet hours and working with him to say, how are we going to work the problem? So, he emailed a few of the people and said, hey, I'm autistic. I can't get to you. Can I bring you a coffee during break so I can get a couple of minutes with you, or carry your posters to the car? I'm willing to work with you here because I can't get to you. And some of these simple people think accommodations, they think, oh my goodness, it's going to cost a lot of money. Sometimes it's just changing a communication style. Sometimes it's just, I'm going to come into work 30 minutes later and stay 30 minutes later, so I'm not emotionally exhausted from fighting the busy bus or the commute, and I can arrive at my desk with a full battery, ready to charge, or ready to work, as opposed to coming in at a normal time and then maybe needing an hour to relax until I, get back to that level.
Yeah, the model of employee-centric management is also what this brings up to me, which, in some ways is good management in general. I mean, it took COVID for people to think about, where are my people? How do they live? How are they actually working? What makes them most productive? And then hopefully, as you said, Nat, we can take some of what we've learned into the workplace and just be in greater communication and more explicit about individual needs. And then for the manager to do what she can to adjudicate across teams also. Which brings me back to you, Jamel. I mean, EY, you work in teams, I suppose, a lot of the time. Any tools, approaches there that you can share with our audience that they may want to take with them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, Nat and Ranga hit on some really important concepts. And again, the whole thought around psychological safety, for some people, it might be a little bit foreign, but I think that there has to be some trust that is earned in order for you to feel as if you are in a psychologically safe environment. And with that comes a level of transparency from the leaders, from the managers. Carin, I think that one of the things you mentioned about what your style is so important, because that level of transparency is almost giving an open door to say, okay, if you're going to share, it makes it comfortable for me as an individual to share. So one of the things that I do specifically when we onboard a newer team, I let them know what my communication style is. Hey, I receive a lot of emails, guys. So when you send me an email, it's important for me that you bullet the information out, because if you put it in a paragraph form, it's too much and I may glaze over it. I may not get the full context of what you want to communicate. That's a way that I'm being transparent to the team. That's a way of I'm sharing with them. It's okay to share how you best work. And I love the enablers and not necessarily the accommodations, right? Because this is a slight spin on the words. What do you need in order for you to be successful? These are questions that we ask our team members so that it's kind of spent with success and not just support to be bare minimum. Hey, tell me how I can help to make you a successful team member. And sometimes we can make adjustments, but to be honest, sometimes we can't, right? So in every field, there are certain requirements. So there may be times that you can adjust work hours because the chaos and the bedlam of getting into an office might be overload. But let's say if you're working in a doctor's office and you're a surgeon, you got to be there at a certain time if the operation is going to take place at a certain time. So I think that we have to be as flexible as we can. The word that I use with our team is remain nimble. We will remain nimble. If there's a different way that you want to receive information, let's talk about that and see how we can do that. One specific example I also want to give to anyone out there that's listening is that oftentimes when we have meetings and we have decks that are prepared in advance of, if you want contributions and you want feedback to the information being shared, it's important, share that information in advance of. Not everyone can think about responses right on the spot. It may take a person a little bit longer to process, but it doesn't mean that that person's contributions are not valuable. I may need to look at it an hour before the meeting versus someone else that can look at it within 10 minutes of the meeting and say, hey, I think we can do 1, 2, and 3, just in order for us to make sure that we're open and we're nimble enough to kind of deviate from our process, right? We love process. In any organization, there's a process for everything. I have been one, my leadership has been one, where we continue to challenge the process. Why do we do it that way? Is there a reason? If there's a compliance reason, and if we will put ourselves with a firm in harm's way, then the answer is no, we can't. But if there isn't, let's consider that. Let's talk about what does these customizations look like so that everyone that is looking to contribute has the ability to do so.
I really like the idea of asking why and then keep on asking why, because often it's just, why do we, for example, interview, well, why do we do it this way? Well, because we've pretty much always done it this way. Well, why? Whom did it benefit? So I think this idea is important. And also, you cited the example of a surgeon, which there are workplaces where we are about fit. There are certain rules. There are some jobs, several of you have an experience in tech that I couldn't do. I would not thrive in these environments. So some is about finding a fit, and then is finding the fit within the fit, which is where the manager sort of comes.
I think a lot of that also just goes to being transparent. So if it is that you have to be here at 9 o'clock, that a week in advance or whatever in advance, so you can say, guess what? I know if anybody's, I use spoon theory a lot. If anybody's not familiar with spoon theory, it's kind of like measuring how many batteries or how many spoons you have left in your drawer to use throughout the day. But if I know I'm going to have this event is socially stressful for me, so I know that after it's over, I'm not going to plan another stressfully event, so I can plan and balance my spoons throughout the day, and I can be transparent. And just having that sense of communication, as Jamel said, sending data in advance, or social contracting for people to know, or making a pledge to know that if my camera is off, that doesn't mean I'm distracted, or being able to say, I'm not going to look directly at the camera. I'm going to be taking notes during the conference, so I can take, to have that awareness of what we're doing, or things like, I work better, can I record this so I can go back to look at it later? Just being transparent about your work style. Sometimes my brain buffers and I just need a minute. And one of my friends just told me that whenever they do this, that they just need a minute, they've expressed to their team that they say the word pineapple. So they'll be in the middle of a conversation and he'll go, pineapple, and everybody will know to wait a minute. Okay, and let his brain and mouth coordinate. And it's kind of funny and it's simple, but it's sharing that information. It's almost as freeing as sharing your pronouns, so that people know that this is who I am, this is how I work best. How do you work best? And having that transparency, I think, is critical.
And Nat, I would love to say what we hear, what you're sharing is just basic communication, right? And it's so basic and a fundamental component of how we could work and live and talk, but it is an area of opportunity, grave opportunity. I love the pineapple example. I had a person earlier today on a call that said, I'm freezing, and that's their quote unquote safe word. And we say, okay, they're freezing and they're wait, and it is the ability to connect my thoughts to what I want to communicate and then not rush them through it, but it's a safe space in order for them to do that. And I think those are one of the things that I really would love to make sure that we get out of this discussion is the importance of that safe environment where innovation can occur and true synergy can occur.
Right. And
so if I may add just one aspect to this, both what Nat was saying as well as Jamal is saying, it is really important for everyone, and in particular also neurodivergent individual, to understand themselves really in terms of what will help me by way of support. And, we work with, students, or basically we work with our clients in terms of preparing them for the workplace. One of the most critical area that we spend time in is, do you understand yourself? What are the dimensions in your behavioral and cognitive characteristics that could benefit from a supportive environment, or what form of support is helpful to you? And that's not an area that, one can assume that one knows intuitively or automatically. That is something that takes effort to understand. Like, I have learned for myself, just like what Nat was saying, I'm actually not very comfortable in social interactions. This is something that I've always suspected all through my life, but having gotten involved in the mission that I'm in now, I now recognize my dimension of neurodivergence and what I need in terms of recovering in order for me to, perform in the next one. So self-awareness or self-understanding is a very important component in order that you can actually advocate for yourself in the workplace in another other context. Often issues arise in the workplace, certainly for some of our clients, when they do not understand how they can be supported and are not willing to advocate for themselves in an effective way.
So the notion of, who we are and what we want as a basis is something that Bill has been commenting on in the chat, about the notion that we have all been forced to conform, so that some of us may have forgotten what our authentic selves are, and that when we do bring them to work or to our personal world, to remember who we are, who we want to be. Thank you, Bill. I think these comments are important for everyone, and it also drives the empathy that is necessary to accept how others are. So we want to get to questions as soon as possible. So let's move quickly to sort of the action. We started to talk about this. On my mind is hiring. Nat sort of started to showcase some of the tactics that we have to bring people together. They tend to be very social. Think of fairs, product fairs where millions of people are milling about. Interviews, we're hiring for social skills, for jobs where social skills may not be needed. So I'm curious here to think around, what are some specific actions, not just that big companies can take, but we also have people on the call who have smaller companies, concretely what they can do. And maybe Ranga, will start with you, since you addressed.
Yeah, this is, at the very essence of, the mission that I'm on. Let me just say this, okay? I don't know of anybody who really believes that interviews are the best way to find the right candidates for jobs. And yet, we kind of mindlessly do this. And I say this about myself. For 37 years, I've done that. In terms of, because that's been the norm, that has been the sort of the way we do things and all of that, right? And that is not good for practically anybody, really, okay? Now, it used to be a long time ago, certainly for large companies, there were really deliberate pipelining efforts that large companies engaged in. There was a large internship program. And they didn't tend to be like, you had to be super competitive in order to get in. There was a certain level of, basic threshold that you need to cross. And then you were given a chance to come in, be a part of, that pipeline, learn something. And in the process, the company learned about how you work and their suitability for the thing and all that. We have done away with all of those things in most companies. When you look at the job description today of most companies, the person has to walk on water, fly in the air, do backflip like, the athlete that just did a record-setting thing just 2 days ago or something, right? And there is nobody like that in the universe. And yet we all pretend like those are really valid job descriptions, right? So one of the things that I would say is that with some of the smaller companies, something that we are trying, for example, right down the street from where we are in San Jose, is this company called Cupertino Electric. It's not so small. It's $1 billion private company. Any big building in the Bay Area that has electrical connections in it, probably Cupertino Electric is involved in terms of setting it up. There, because of an enlightened HR manager there, the sort of the understanding that we have with her is this, if we say, hey, you should give a chance to this individual, take an employment first approach. Don't put the filtering and all of those things in front. Employment first. It's a small thing, 2 months, 3 months. Give them a try. Give them some real work. Give them a chance. And she can't say enough good things about people that she has taken in that basis, where other companies have rejected them because they cannot interview well, they don't do certain things in terms of our social model of what it takes to get into the thing. And she can't say enough good things about how wonderful these individuals are. And by the way, these are not like high-tech individuals. The kind of job that she needed was to help her reorganize her office, help her digitize her office, things like that, right? So one fundamental thing I would advise to every company is really, really, really look at, do you really need to have these socially stressful interaction mechanisms called interviews and phone screens as the primary mechanism by which you take people in? Could you take an approach of employment first? Now, of course, you can't give employment to everybody in the world, but in your own sphere, within your own abilities, why not be more accepting to give them a chance, give people more a chance, and then use that as a selection process to give them regular jobs?
It's actually putting in practice the competency-based interviewing.
Exactly.
We've all been, trying to do. Jamil, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Ranga bring up some very, very interesting points there. And I think that, we have to be very mindful in that the broader space where we look for employment, there are certain rules and regulations, right? So there's some opportunities that you may have to provide a person with the opportunity to showcase their talent and their skill first, but in other organizations and other companies, you can't do that, right? So I'm going to go back to say, like the surgeon, right? The person doesn't have the opportunity to go into the operating room and kind of try it out to see if it's going to work. But I do think it's very important that any employer or any organization look at their existing processes to really, challenge yourselves on whether or not all of these things are requirements for the expectations of the role. That's one of the things that we did here at EY, looking at employing neurodivergent talent. We looked at our existing process, and we did shift, to Ranga's point, from a behavioral-based kind of process where you nod appropriately, you smile appropriately, you shake your hand with the right strength, but not too weak. So we, again, shifted away from those items and really focused on what are the components for the role. And we immerse individuals in an experience that allow them to really showcase what they would be able to bring from a performance perspective. And we provide coaching throughout the process, because the goal is to screen individuals in that has interest, aptitude, and abilities to perform in this space where they would be successful. Those are some of the goals. It's one of the entry points into the firm, but we also more holistically are looking at our processes just in case a person decides that he, she, they choose not to come into the firm through the Neurodiversity Centers of Excellence. Maybe they want to come through the traditional way, but kind of really giving some knowledge to our experienced recruiters on, hey, these are some things that you can do in order to make the experience that much more inclusive. Again, I want to make sure that I'm pointing out here, when you have larger organizations, you can't turn the entire organization with one particular thing that's going to upset the entire process, but you can make these smaller incremental changes that ultimately have impact on the broader culture. Again, I think that we have to be mindful that there are some goals that we really want to make sure are seen from a broader neurodiversity movement, but we have to be very strategic and deliberate about how we align ourselves with making sure we're advancing the movement and ultimately not damaging it by trying to do too much too quickly.
The secondary screening that occurs is for promotions, right? So, I mean, I spent a little bit of time in consulting. You're a happy individual contributor as part of a team. Then you have to manage people, which some of us really like. Some of us find it very stressful. In order to get to partner, where really you have to be sort of an individual contributor and sell business again. And so I actually had a friend who was skip promoted and was never a manager because they said, you're going to be an individual contributor for a little longer, and then we will just make you partner. And he has been extremely, extremely successful. So I think also thinking about where are the various points in organizations where we have these informal types of interviews, and are we really looking at the attributes that will matter most? Much as, promotes excellent scientists into management jobs because it's the only way to move forward. So we think these structures.
Absolutely. And I want to, I'm sorry, Nick, can I just share this? Because I think that point in itself is so powerful. I think everyone jumping in, right, Carin? So we wanted to share these pieces. But when individuals get to the point where they're looking for what does the next step look like for me within the organization, it's being able to have those conversations, but also saying, how can we customize the actual role, not changing the job description at all, but let's say, how can we customize this where appropriate so that you have the opportunity to move up within the organization and not changing the broader structure of the requirements for anyone that's at that rank. But those are individual conversations because it will look different. Your contribution has to look different when you move upward within organizations. And when people aspire and actually eventually get to leaders within the organization, they continue to help shape and craft the overall organization, but there are still requirements that you will be held accountable for. And if you're unable to successfully sustain those quote unquote requirements, it puts a person ultimately in an adverse position. So that's why, again, those conversations, coming to your point, are so very important so that we're doing this together and that something is not happening to the team member. If we're talking about promotion to management and you're a senior, it's the conversation, not me forcing you to do something that you're not interested and or ready to do. But Nat, I'm sure you have some points there you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to comment quick, and I know I'm trying to be mindful of time here. So one of the things IBM has done is neurodiversity at IBM actually sits under our new collar jobs area and not under PW, people with disabilities or people with diverse abilities, depending on what flavor you use. And I think that's such a perfect spot for it because it's about skill. And some projects that we went through is looking at the job description. Does this actually require a 4-year degree? Does it, or is internship or is some other experience just as good? Looking at the skill base, looking at the words that you use in the job description, and thinking, going back to those conscious and unconscious bias that you may have, even going to the, oh, I want to hire like neurodivergence. Okay, I think Sheldon Big Bang, right? A white male who's really good in IT, who's happy to, stay in a dark corner and write code all day. But that doesn't, it could be a Black trans accountant or a legal or me, or people go, you can't be neurodivergent. You're on this call. How are you managing this? And it's not only those entry-level positions. Now, yes, there is a huge percentage of college-educated neurodivergents that are being blocked at the front door because they don't smile or shake their hand, or they couldn't get to the internship fair, or they don't have those success skills taught to them earlier on. So it's so important to work with the universities earlier in the pipeline, even at the high school level, P-Tech, where we can go through and get those skills to have them learn at age 16 and up to self-advocate for themselves. So when they get to the job interview, or if they're going through the onboarding process and they see a box that says, click here if you have a disability, and they go, well, kind of, sort of, I don't know. I know my son refused to check the box. I'm like, check the box. Nope, not checking it. And, back, forth, smack. But to go through that and say, what if we change the language in that box? What if we change that language to say, is there something that is going to help you succeed at this interview? Mm-hmm. Leave it open-ended. We don't have, and then we remove that, oh, well, I don't have this letter, or I'm self-diagnosed, or you may have somebody who just wants to share a piece of information. One of my friends cannot hear in one ear, and he's like, I don't consider that a disability, but it probably would be good for the interviewer to know that. So to have that, again, that transparency, that conversation, and really going about changing things to be neurodivergent friendly, which is really going to make it human friendly in so many aspects. A lot of neurodivergents need their own environment, like that penguin, like the ostrich. Like, we're all going to work in our best environment, and it is a two-way street. We did have somebody, a neurodivergent, who came in and said, I need natural light. I need that corner office with all the windows. And we're like, yeah, it's not going to happen. But we can give you a hybrid model where you could work at home and control your own lighting, or we're going to give you this cube or this office location, and we're going to bring in from some full spectrum lights. You could turn off the, lights above and and work it out. So it is a, it is a two-way street. And my idea, or my, where I see neurodivergent hiring is that it's kind of like a good dating app. You don't need it anymore once it's really working, because everybody can bring, you don't need a special door where somebody could come in and say, hey, I'm neurodivergent, or hey, I'm this, let's have a conversation to go through this. And it's really about, I think there was a question in there about how, how do companies get started, and it's just start and realize you're going to make mistakes. But talk to neurodivergents if you want to focus on that, just like you would talk to Black or women, or, to have these conversations to get input. We're here. We're happy to have these conversations. Don't just read it in a book, just like you wouldn't read it in a book what it's like to be a woman. Like, through storytelling, through empowering, learn and have this information. But for any hiring thing, you have to change your culture first. Have to. Otherwise, it's just checking a box or some marketing ploy to say, hey, look, we're going to hire more of this. Yay, look at us. You have to change your culture, because you could spend all this money and bring in neurodivergents, and they're not going to stay, and you're wasting money, and you're wasting their time, and overall, it's not a good idea. I think there's a few folks on the call who've been on some of my panels, and I always have to go back to my gardening motif, as you can tell by all the plants behind me, is that if you were going to plant a new seed in a garden, you're not going to just leave it on top of the soil, right? You have to turn the soil over. You got to get rid of the rocks and the sticks. You got to amend the soil, put in your nutrients. Then that new seed is going to take root. But then when you change that culture, existing neurodivergents who are already at your company can thrive better. And that just makes the environment better for everybody to enjoy. The butterflies are going to come in, like everybody is going to be able to thrive, and just start and have the conversation. Even something as simple as in your disclosure, in your, we do not discriminate against blah, 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 you can add the word, neurodivergence, and have, wave that flag, show your pronouns to let that person know it is safe to come out. On my resume, I have being neurodivergent listed as under my skills, and that's okay. But there's issues with disclosing and fear, and you have to move it up front earlier in the pipeline.
So we're nearly out of time. I think we've addressed some of the audience questions. There was a comment about substituting appreciation for acceptance in the framework, whatever the words are, make them your own. Just think in terms of learning, think in terms of impact, and then think in terms of sustaining the effort. We also had a question around how would we know when we are successful in these endeavors. I feel that we've begun to talk about it a little bit, but maybe we'll close there. Just a quick lightning round. How will we know when we truly create organizations that promote neurodiversity? What will it feel like? What will all of us have to do to make it happen? Nat, let's go on to you first. Or actually jump in, whoever's feeling most.
Okay, no, that's fine. Mine would be that it's supported at your executive level, that this program is not just a warm fuzzy, that it is funded, that the neurodivergent persona has a seat at the table when you're looking at design, whether it's physical space, whether it's a diversity council, to have that seat at the table. There is this dichotomy under neurodivergence, if they are under people with disabilities or not. I personally feel it is not, but others disagree. But why not cast the widest net as possible and give everyone a voice? And when you can have these, and going to the acceptance, we do use acceptance at IBM, but our ND community did vet it and gave full thumbs up. But I think next year might be appreciation. So thanks for that review.
So Nat, I'm going to jump in there and say I also see the call out of appreciation versus acceptance, and I think that is personal, preference. I think some people may look at appreciation a certain way as well versus acceptance, but I think the seat at the table is definitely going to be important, and that's one of the ways that we'll be able to see the movement continue to expand. But I think having a voice at the table in addition to the seat and a level of influence, it's great to have a seat at the table sometimes, right? But if we think back to, you know, maybe when you were younger and you wanted to sit at the adult table and not the kids' table for Thanksgiving or any other holiday, you were able to sit at the table, but you weren't able to participate in the discussion. I think having the seat and having the voice as well as a level of influence is really going to be one of the metrics that we will be able to go back and review when we start talking about how is the broader neurodiversity movement continuing to advance and kind of like expand. But I'm going to pause there because I want to make sure Ranga gets a point in this here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Nat and Jamal have said. What I would add to that for consideration is this. Most organizations are sampling where are employees at in terms of working for the company and how they feel and all that on a periodic basis. I know when I was in IBM, we had that as the annual survey, and then all managers had to sort of review that, answer to that, and all that. I would encourage organizations to summon the courage to add questions that have to do with things like there was even one of the comments there. People have had to mask in traditional environments because if they were not doing it, they felt actually unsafe in terms of being that, right? Why not come out and ask the question? Do you feel like, the company, the culture is providing the opportunity to bring your authentic self to the workplace? Or what are the ways in which you are having to mask your, self? And then questions along those lines. I'm sure that, working with our neurodivergent employees and the other along those lines in terms of identifying what are the right set of questions to ask and to refine it as we learn, I think would be a good way to know whether or not we are being really successful or we're just doing, kind of marketing blitz or a lip service to, the embracing neurodiversity intentionally.
So I could talk to you guys all day. I wish we were in the real world and we had time to sort of catch up and chat. But it's been wonderful to be together virtually. So much to say. I think this notion of, success enablers, working also with universities and the medical field. So what is systemic about the way that we, we wind up with less diverse workplaces than we wish. All of our contribution in terms of being good with ourselves and good to each other, learning with and from each other. So thank you very much to these wonderful panelists. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution to making the workplace better. We're deeply grateful to all of you. Andrea, I'm ceding the virtual floor over to you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Carin, for moderating this fantastic panel. As always, we wish we had more than 1 hour. It's just never seems like enough. Thank you very much again to our fantastic presenters, Nat Lyckowski, Ranga Jayaraman, and Jamal Mitchell. Thank you all for being here today and for sharing your experiences and really opening our eyes to a lot of things that make us think deeply and think about how we can do better at the workplace. I am Andrea Jett. I'm the Executive Director of the FACC Chicago. We were really happy to support the FACC New England on this fantastic event series. Just to give you a bit of context of the network, there are 18 FACCs around the US. You can find all of our events and contact information on the FACC national page, which is nationalfacc.org. We have a lot more coming up. Thank you again to our series sponsors, EY and IPSEN. And please stay tuned for the final episode of the 6-part DEI series, which will be in June. The date will be announced soon. Thank you all for being here today, and we really hope to see you again. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.